All right, so this is video one in the ad redesign critique. There are going to be some things that I go over in more detail in this critique than I do in the others. And so everyone will want to make sure they watch this entire video to catch all the details that I'll provide. So the first thing I want to mention is that this is a magazine ad for print. So for print means it needs to be an effective PPI of 300 on your imagery. And the magazine ad part is to say, which I think you're doing a pretty decent job of here, it's not a poster. So when you look at the text size, almost across the board, everybody generally has to start with making the significant amounts of information smaller. Yours are maybe a little bit big, but not too bad. And the thing I want to draw your attention to is when we're designing for print, we have margins that InDesign drops in for us. It usually looks somewhere along the lines of this, and this is our safety margin. It tells us where it's safe to have information that won't get cut off. So rather than designing all the way to the edge here, which risks this information being trimmed by the paper trimmer, we actually need to keep our text inside those margins. So that's the first thing that I want to point out for you. The second thing I want to point out is that you've chosen this beautiful picture, which I don't think there's anything wrong with, except that it creates some problems for you with legibility. And I can tell that you know that because you've added in these squares, which you're trying to use to help with legibility, but it would actually be better for you to find a more simple picture that has the space built into that for you so that you don't have to use these squares, because what they end up doing is kind of chunking up or blocking off the different parts of your page, and our eye just jumps from shape to shape rather than to the content or to the other information that you have included. It makes sense to me that you have these bullet points here because it's a list, but we don't need bullet points in front of the other ones. And then we'll need to be careful about visual hierarchy. So this information is at the bottom, but it's actually bigger than almost everything except this information at the top. So I think you have some good design aesthetics. We just need to do some restructuring to make sure that you aren't hindering legibility and still meeting the requirements for print. Okay, I like the colors that you've chosen. I think it's a fine idea to keep all of your text like in a smaller zone, though I am kind of wondering, it might just be how you've used your margins, but the document size looks a little bit strange, so make sure you do have that 8.5 by 11 document size. The typeface that you've chosen here, I think this is about as legible as it gets. So when it comes down in as smaller in this area, because it is a script typeface, or even closer to even on the edge of decorative typeface, you cannot use it at small sizes. So this size here will definitely need to change. Also, by treating that in that typeface, you're saying this is really important information. And while it might be valuable that they deliver anywhere in town, I feel like there's other information in here that might even be more important. The repetition of the color, I think, is a good thing. The alignment's a little bit funky, so this portion here, I kind of understand what's going on, and then the alignment gets really kind of funky down here. So this is justified, maybe, text, and this is right aligned text, and so it just gets, and then this is center aligned, so it just gets kind of murky down here as to how you're organizing the information. Usually when we see lines like this, it's kind of a way of showing that you're worried you're not taking enough space. I don't think you need that. It might be more visually interesting. I don't know how flexible this flower graphic you have is for print, but to use one of those flowers in a more dramatic way, and then to have the information kind of relate to that flower or something, because that, I think part of what you're coming up with is because you have things at an appropriate size, you feel like there's too much space, and so kind of used a couple of tools that aren't helping right now. So just a few thoughts. I think you have some good ideas here. They can just continue to be finessed. All right. I shouldn't do this while I'm hungry. It's lunchtime and this looks so delicious. So I like the picture that you've chosen. I like the background that you've chosen. As long as that's print resolution, I think that's fine. This typeface here, I'm not going to go into this in your video. You can watch the previous two videos where I talk about this, but can't be used at this size. And then it looks like this typeface is actually different than the other typefaces that you have, or maybe not. Maybe it's the same. It's kind of confusing to know how many typefaces you're using. So I would drop this typeface out and put a different typeface there. And if you're going to use two typefaces, just let there be two. The only other thing I would say about it is right now it kind of looks like a magazine cover, and the top part does like this. And we'll do that project. I think we do that in this class. I can't remember, honestly. I'll have to check. But right now it just kind of looks more like a cover because of how you use the food. So one of the ways you could potentially get around this is by using the food in a different way. So maybe the food is there, or maybe the food comes up from the bottom and the text is around it. This, like, I see proximity wise that these are different things. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's totally fine. It just right now looks a little bit less like an ad and more like a cover. And I think that has to do with the treatment of the name of the company and the alignment and things like that. So play with it. This is not a bad like start that you have. If you turned this in, I think you would still do well. I just think as you glance at it, you kind of assume it's a different type. If that's not very clear, we can further discuss it. Let me know. All right. So the first thing that I'm seeing is this lovely picture. Really interesting. Does need to be taken into Photoshop and have the background removed so that you don't have these lines kind of oddly floating around the edge of the picture. Also would just nix the lines. I don't think you need them. I don't think they're particularly helping. This typeface that you've chosen here actually carries a really strong connection to early computer electronics. Is the typeface that was used like on the first operating system, MS-DOS, at least the first Microsoft operating system. And it doesn't really vibe with the picture that you have right now. I think it's a good choice to have a sans serif, but this particular one has a really strong association. It's also, I'm sure you might have seen this, a little bit clunky. Like the letter spacing is a little bit weird here, or maybe you did that, I'm not sure. But it's not nearly singing as nicely as this picture that you've chosen. Proximity-wise, by spreading all of these things out, you kind of tell me that there's 6 different ideas rather than a list of 6 things. And then I think there's supposed to be some sort of a heading there. Double check that you make sure you have all the same text and information. The spacing kind of is confusing here as well. There's more spacing here, but there's less spacing between this section of things. This all caps typeface kind of carries a very similar feel to, and it might even be the same typeface, but in a different use. So I would work on the type, work on the proximity, and then this picture, it's so pretty that it kind of steals the show. So it might be better to use it in a different place. So maybe it's, at the top, but it drops down and you have the text underneath, or maybe it's on the left side or the right side, but by kind of sticking it right there in the middle and having it as big as it is, you cause everything else to need to be really strong. And right now the rest of it is just not quite as strong. And then with your alignment, it looks like this is center aligned, this is right aligned, this is center aligned, these are center aligned, but it's just a little bit disjointed.